Dear students, welcome to the interview of Lecture 10, Recommendations and Instrument for Action. We now have the chance to ask Professor Messner a few questions. Professor Messner, thank you for this great lecture. I was very impressed by what you were saying with the differentiation between the policy instruments, the technologies, and then the societal change and innovations. And I wanted to ask you, because you were saying how it's actually, we have technologies, we have policy instruments, but the core of the change will be a societal one. So could you maybe give a few examples of societal innovations that you think might happen?
Yeah, I'm very oftenly making the comparison between the innovation of enlightenment several hundred years ago and sustainability now. And we all know that from the invention of enlightenment and the first books and papers and thinkings about how enlightenment might change the world to the emergence of democracies, there has been a time lag, because people need to listen first, to learn then, and then to translate these kind of new thinking into societal change. So this is one of the comparisons which I have in mind when I say that it is much more than policies. So the debate about sustainability started in the 70s. We all remember limits to growth. And then the big report, the Brundtland report in '87 on the sustainability challenges of the global economy. Now we have Rio 2 already. So 40 years of discussions about what sustainability is about. And it needs time to translate this into policy action, reorientation in our economic concepts and frameworks, and societal progress. This is what I have in mind, actually. It's much more than policy. It is the shift of mental maps and what Germans call Leitbilder in our societies and economies.
So Leitbilder means like the main image that people aim to strive to follow?
Yeah, maybe we might call it narratives.
Narratives.
No, all our societies are built on certain narratives. The industrial society is a narrative. The social welfare state in continental Europe is a narrative. This is what I have in mind. And the sustainability in low carbon society is a new narrative. So we need to start thinking about it. We need to create concepts for that. People need to have the feeling that the elements are there to make the shift. And this is more than normal policy making.
So there will be a time lag between the time the narrative is in everybody's minds and the change.
I would say there is already a time lag. This is why I argued that the whole discussion started in the 70s.
Okay.
So we are now in 2012, 4 decades, 40 years of discussion and learning process already. And this is for us a pre-phase to the actual transformation towards a low-carbon economy then.
Okay. Hopefully with the internet things will go only faster and not slower.
I think so, because we can learn faster now, we can interchange concepts globally now. Ideas switch from northern countries to southern countries and the other way around much faster than any time in human history before. This is something which can accelerate the process, of course.
Well, this brings me to a point you were mentioning in your lecture about the need for more cooperation with scientists from developing countries. I thought this was very interesting because it's not something we think about every day. Could you comment maybe a bit more on that? What you meant with those cooperations?
Yeah. I mean, 80% of the publications worldwide are coming from 25 countries or so, but we do have 192 countries. So if you would like to make these kind of transformations worldwide, we need knowledge about low carbon reforms, transformations, technologies in all countries. So we need knowledge bases for that. We need universities for that. We need to invest in that. This is why I argue for global knowledge creation. I'm just coming back from the World Bank. The World Bank is actually a global organization, World Bank. People from 180 countries are working in the World Bank, but they are coming from only 10 universities in English-speaking countries. So there is a mismatch between what the World Bank is bringing together in terms of knowledge and the rest of the world. And legitimate knowledge needs a much broader knowledge base.
Okay. And now we're talking about this knowledge structure. Now there seems to be a disparity. And another disparity you mentioned was a bit the power structures, that this was also changing. Could you maybe explain what power structure is and also what a power shift is?
The last 50 years have been driven, after the Second World War, have been driven by the OECD world. We call them the industrialized countries. They have been organized since the 70s in what we call the G7 club. So 7 economies, the richest ones, feeling themselves and defining themselves as a center of gravity of the world, driving and managing the most important global economic policies. So this is what I call power centers and power structures. And many other countries with much less influence of what is going on internationally. This is power. And now we do have power shifts because only 20 years ago, 30% of our global exports have been dominated by OECD countries. Only 30% came from non-OECD countries. Now it's 50-50. In several years, the non-OECD countries will be much more powerful in terms of economic weight in the global economy than OECD countries. So things are changing really radically.
Okay. And you were showing that change because you were showing that the E7 countries were gaining importance versus the G7 countries. And I had a question because you were talking also about this political power and the economical power, and that seemed to be tipping the balance in the E7 and G7. But then in the WBGU report, there's a stress on the need for democracy and deliberation in the transformation. And I was wondering, in this political and economical powers, where does democracy come in? Because in the graph you were showing, China had a very important role, and I believe today China is not a democracy yet, or not considered as such. So could you comment on?
Yeah, we argue that in democracies we need broad participation to make the transformation possible. So if you cannot engage people, you will not see the great transformation, because we need reforms which has to have a broad legitimacy base. So participation is key in terms of organizing legitimacy in democracies. Then we do have other countries which are still not democratic. China is a good example for that. China is actually making huge investments, fortunately, in low-carbon technologies, in the energy sector, in the urbanization sector. So China is doing a big part of that. And in China itself, the big discussion is now, how can the country, step by step, liberalize its political structures? Because from economic history, we know that beyond a certain wealth threshold, countries need to become politically more liberal, let's call it democracy, or they are running into economic stagnation also. Because if you become richer, you have a middle classes asking for participation. You need well-qualified people, but they will ask for participation. If the society and the economy is becoming more complex, you need to decentralize power structures and governance structures also. So economic progress and democratic progress in the long run beyond a certain threshold, and economic history is telling us beyond $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 per capita income, you need this kind of political liberalization. In China, China is already on a level of $5, $6, $7. So in China, the issue of liberalizing the country will become key.
Okay, so in the very near future,
during the next decade, I think we will see China democratizing itself or running into big economic troubles, because they do have very rigid political structures. In China, the challenge is not so much technology, innovation and investment. The country can do that. It's the political structure of the country which is the major challenge. And they do need to bring this kind of transformation, political transformation, together with the low carbon challenges.
Okay. Well, then that's a good example to look at in the next years for the transformation.
We should, because the investments of China and the growth dynamic in China is so huge that this country is actually the single most important country in this whole game. Okay.
And in the transformation, you have different scenarios that you developed. The 4 scenarios, in which you had the climate goals and then the power shifts. The power shifts, exactly. And I wanted to ask you, how did you develop those scenarios? And also, in those scenarios, you talk about climate crisis. And I just wanted to know also what you mean with climate crisis, if you have just a sentence or an image that, because it seems a bit abstract, and I know that we talk about it here, but sometimes, you know, you lose the image of what it means, because it's just climate.
Okay, your first question was on how emerge this kind of scenario.
Exactly.
Yeah. And in my research during the last years, I'm talking about 3 big waves of global change, and they are coming in parallel. The first one is globalization itself, so the global economy, global interdependencies. There is no isolated national economy now on Earth. We do have all our economies interrelated, and this is one of the big waves of global change. The second big wave of global change is the power shift. No? So we have had OECD country and northern country driven global economy during the last 5 decades, and we now see that emerging economies are becoming much stronger, and relatively OECD countries will lose economic and political power. And this implies that the way we organize global trade policies, the way we organize global energy policies and low carbon strategies is taking place in these new power constellation. And the third wave of global change is the climate issue, is the planetary boundary issue. This implies that we need to organize now global wealth creation within the planetary boundaries. And this is as strong, from my perspective, as the other 2 waves of global change, because if we go and solve the climate problem, we need to reorganize the global economy towards a global low-carbon economy. And as we have been seeing during the lecture, it will look like very differently. So it's a driver of global change. If we don't solve the climate problem, we will run into climate crises. And this is your second question then. Yeah. And climate crisis implies, and this is what all the data show, we will see huge water shortages in many parts of the world. We do have water problems in several local hotspots currently. We will see not only national but subcontinental water crises. We will therefore also see food crisis in many countries emerging. So it's food and it's water. And the element which goes beyond is the discussion that global warming might result in tipping points in the entire Earth system. One of the examples is that at the end of the century, if we go towards 3-4 degrees Celsius global warming, the entire Amazon forest might collapse. If this would be the case, you would see a completely different agricultural structure in whole Latin America, because the Amazon is now the center of the water system of Latin America. This would be a big accident in the global Earth system and would have major impacts. This is why we talk about climate crises.
Crisis, okay. I mean, in this power structure or power shift, there are different levels. There's the local level and then there's the global level that interplay with each other to create that structure. And I have 2 questions. So the first question is, how do you know that they're gonna link, you know, because what if every country decides, yeah, we want to transform, but we have our own idea of how to do the transformation. So how does this accumulate to a global project?
Right.
And then my next question is relating to the global. There are global institutions, and you mentioned some of them, but you also mentioned the need to reinforce them, like to reinforce UNEP, and to create a council for sustainability. But why do the existing ones not work? And also, will just reinforcing or creating new ones solve the problem that maybe there are just difficulties to do things at the global level?
Yeah, these are very important questions. Part of the answer is that we had a G7 global order. And it has been driven by these G7 countries, mainly and very often driven by the US. Now we do have other countries which are becoming so important. We formed the G20. But many observers argue that actually we are currently living in something like a G0 world. So a world order without any center of gravity, because all the important actors worldwide are very much focusing currently on their internal affairs. And they do not have the power and they do not have the political will to shape the international order. The US is in a huge financial crisis and economic crisis, not doing very much on the international crisis and the international arenas. Europe is very similar, the euro crisis, the debt crisis. We do have China, it's economically very important, but it is still not substituting the US power structures of the last 5 decades. India is very relevant as an economic actor. It's growing very fast. It's important for climate policies. But on the other hand side, if you talk to government officials in India, they will tell you that we are still a developing countries. We are not able to shape the international arena. So currently, no one is really pushing forward these agendas. We are confronted with a leadership crisis, actually. So it is a G0 world. And this is why we, on the one hand side, argue that we would need this kind of global organizational innovations. A global emission trading scheme would really be an important part of solving the climate crisis. But it's difficult to make progress there. And therefore we come up also with bottom-up reforms. Cities are important. We talk about these pioneer groups in terms of making possible dynamics which the global order is currently not producing.
Okay. And I had a question also, because the carbon trading thing seems to be a very central element in the transformation. And it might sound a bit silly, but if you tell people that you're going to give a per capita budget, aren't people going to try to have more babies to have more carbon credits?
We thought about that.
Okay.
This is why we factored in our formula to calculate these national carbon budgets I talked about. We factored in population growth. And we argued of keeping in our calculation the 7 billion people which we are today worldwide, to keep that. And this implies that if countries are becoming bigger, in terms of population, they do not receive bigger budget, greenhouse gas budgets. This would be an incentive to have lower population growth, actually. Okay.
And another question I had was, in many of the things you talk about, there's always this we need to do this, we need to subsidize this. Who is that we?
We the people.
Okay.
This is the start of the US Constitution. So when I talk about we in this sense, I talk about human mankind. We are talking about global commons. In this case, we are talking about the global atmosphere. So we need to protect the global atmosphere, we as the global constituency. We are very much focusing on this kind of point because we do have nation states, we do have local communities, but at the end of the day, 7 billion people, 190 nation states, we all need to protect the global climate and the global atmosphere. This is why we very often talk in this sense about the global we.
Okay. So this we the people, we have to do the transformation. And you were talking about the big push versus the polycentric approach. And as we, the people, where should we or I look for to participate in this? Should I look for to participate or to push for the big push, or should I look at more local initiatives and, you know, be part of the polycentric action kind of things? Where should we focus our energy first?
Yeah, maybe first the question of big push versus polycentric action, and then the question of what we as individuals can do. So we came up with the differentiation between big push and polycentric initiatives because on the one hand side there is no silver bullet. So if you go only for the emission trading stuff, which is a big push element, it still will not be enough because we would change the price structures. But even though, to make the energy transformation possible, for example, we need to invest in R&D activities, research and development activities, to come up with cheap energy solutions, renewable ones now. So we need innovation policies for that. We need to qualify people for that. We need new types of coalitions between researchers. So big push things, changing price structures, and polycentric activities and sectors are necessary anyway. This is one reason why we talk about the big push stuff and the polycentric approaches, because both is necessary. The other reflection was that in many countries you cannot make big push initiatives. I mean, in the German context, the energy transformation decision is a big push, actually. What we said is that we go out of nuclear energy production and we go towards 80% of renewable energy base in 2050 renewable. This is big push. But if you cannot do this kind of transformation, and many countries will not be able to do so, you even though can have many activities in different sectors where is room for reforms, which are not big in scale, but might be pilots which you can scale up afterwards. So different contexts imply that you will go for different strategies. Okay. And therefore we do have these two types of structures. And then your second question is, what can we do individually? Individually, I think what is very important to have in mind is that lifestyle matters. I mean, you and me, we cannot solve the global governance problems. There need to be action on the level of heads of state and governments, etc., etc. But we are all part of our societies and of the global society, and our lifestyle matters. We did a comparison in Chinese states in terms of energy efficiency, and we compared cities with a very similar level of GDP per capita. So in terms of wealth, very similar, but with very different levels of energy consumption. So the question was, why is that the case? And the answer is that lifestyles are very different. So how organize people their private living? Do they go fast? Do they go far in terms of tourism? Do they stay within their cities? Are the cities organized in a way that short ways and short distances between where they work, where they live, where they celebrate their birthdays, or do you have different structures in your cities? This is about lifestyles. This is actually not technologies. No? This is the way we organize our life. And this is where we all can make a difference. When we talk about the agricultural stuff, so bringing greenhouse gas emissions down in the agricultural sector, the single most important determinant is what we eat. So if we eat a lot of meat, the greenhouse gas emissions will be high because this is very land intensive. So the most important factor in the agricultural sector is not technology. The most important factor in the agricultural sector is our consumer behavior. This is why we talk about individual attitudes also being a part of the global low-carbon transformation.
Okay. Well, dear students, I hope that this answered some of your questions and that you noticed how in each of Professor Messner's answers, the criteria he mentioned are covered. I was just thinking that myself. So have a good time doing your homework and see you next time.